Hey, Purple Fairy 22 here. So, I haven't been on in a while and I apologize for that, but it's a new year and I decided to kick it off with dramatic readings of a book. And I probably will do this frequently because it's totally awesome. Now, the book we're going to be I'm going to be dramatically reading today will be Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. This is retold from the Charles Dickens original, but it is by Oliver Twist. I mean, by Charles Dickens, who is dead, by the way, if you didn't know that. And this is also one of my favorite books when I was little. It's like one of the books that I completely loved. And let's start off. Let's see how this is gonna go. Chapter 1, Oliver Twist. Regrettably, our story begins on a note of sadness. It is unfortunate truth that not all beginnings are happy ones. This particular story opens in a workhouse. There was a time, the same time that our story takes place, when too many cities and towns were home to these large cold buildings. Men who could not pay their bills were sentenced to hard labor here. Women and children with no place else to go, lived and worked here. Children left on doorsteps with no family to call their own spent their days in the bottle washing factories. There is nothing beautiful or warm one can say about a workhouse. Only that is where our young hero, Oliver Twist, came into the world. His story is good so far. I'm gonna just say that it's been really good so far. Okay. Sorry about this lighting; it's killing me. In fact, there was almost no story to tell at all. For the first few moments of his life, Oliver did not take to breathing right away. Now things might have been different had he been surrounded by loving aunts and grandmothers. They would have fussed and worried over him. Unfortunately, there was only the doctor, who quickly turned back to the fire, and the old woman, who sat with Oliver and his mother. So it was up to the baby to fight it out on his own. And fight he did. Go, Oliver, go. After a few sniffs and some struggling coughs and a sneeze, he let out a long and quite strong wail. The blanket on the bed rustled as Oliver's mother moved. She slowly raised her pale hand from the pillow and said quietly, "Let me see the child before I die." The doctor looked back from the fire. "Oh, you must not talk about dying yet," he said. I should say not," the old woman added. "When she has lived as long as I have, then she can talk about dying. I've brought 13 children into this world and watched all but 2 die. I know a thing or two about living and dying. She has no reason to talk like that." The patient shook her head. She stretched her hand towards the child. The doctor placed Oliver in her arms. She pressed her cold lips onto the baby's forehead. It was a tender, loving kiss. This was a special moment between mother and son. Then she passed her hand over her own face. Her head dropped onto the pillows, and she was dead. The doctor and old woman worked to save her. They pounded on her chest and rubbed her hands, but there was no use. She was gone. "Oh, the poor dear," the woman cried. "How sad for the little one." She picked Oliver up. He lay quietly in her arms. "Well, there's nothing more I can do," the doctor said. He put his hat on and picked up his bag. "If the child cries, you give him some gruel." He stopped before heading out the door. Shame, too. She was a pretty young thing. "Do you have any idea who she was or where she came from?" "None, sir," the old woman replied. "She has arrived late at night during the terrible rain. No shoes, no bags. She was very sick and ready to give birth." The doctor walked back to the bed. He raised the young woman's left hand. "The same old story," he said, shaking his head. "I see there's no wedding ring. Ah, well, good night," he said, and quickly walked out the door. That is just wrong. I'm just saying this now. Okay. But, I dropped that. Sorry. Okay. The old woman sat before the fire and wrapped the infant in the blanket. She told the woman who ran the workhouse, Mrs. Wumble, that a baby boy had been born. Mrs. Bumble said. "Another orphan for the workhouse to take care of." She looked at the baby with disgust. "Another mouth to feed. More money for my small allowance." There was nothing to envy in the life of an orphan, especially an orphan raised in the workhouse. Their lives were filled with hard work, little play, and very little food. Very few showed pity or kindness towards him, especially those, especially those people who took care of them. Mr. Bumble, the husband of the woman who ran the workhouse, was a town official. The workhouse was one of his responsibilities. He made sure that everything was to the liking of the town council and workhouse board. He was a man who liked to use his power, but failed to realize that no one feared him. His wife, in particular, thought him foolish. The Bumbles looked like one another. Both were short, round, and mean-spirited. It was Mr. Bumble who gave Oliver his last name. He used the alphabet to keep track of all the new orphans' names. When the last orphan came to them, Bumble was at the letter S. Therefore, gave him the name Tubal. As T was next in line, this baby was named Twist. The orphan after Oliver received the name Unwit, and the one after, Wilkins. Very good, Mr. Bumble," Mrs. Bumble said. She wrote Oliver's name in the registry book. "It's official now." "All a part of the good job, Mrs. Bumble," Mr. Bumble answered. "A town official's job is really done." Mr. Bumble did not notice his wife rolling her eyes at his comment. He was too distracted by the screaming baby beside him. Oliver cried loudly. If he could have known that he was an orphan, left to the not-so-tender mercies of the church wanderers and the workhouse staff, perhaps he would have cried all the louder. Chapter 2. Life in a Workhouse. This book is getting good. Yeah. Despite the many obstacles before him, Oliver Twist survived. He was now 10 years old and still in the workhouse. His days were filled with too much work and far too little food. Mr. Bumble was given a weekly allowance. Mrs. Bumble was given a weekly allowance from the town council to feed and dress her charges. She was a very careful woman and was always worried about money. Unfortunately, she was more worried about her personal income than the well-being of the children in her care. Therefore, she kept the majority of the allowance for herself and used the rest to feed the children, in order to make the supply of gruel go farther. Mrs. Bumble watered it down. "That mean, wretched wench!" Even though this meal of thin porridge was not enough to meet the needs of a growing boy, Oliver did grow. He was a small, thin boy with pale blonde hair, but he reached his 10th birthday without too much trouble. His best friend Dick had, I'm sorry, his best friend Dick had a much tougher time. Dick was very weak and sick. Oliver had to help him with his work with washing models in the factory. In fact, he was so worried about Dick that he sometimes tried to pass him the little bits of gruel in his bowl. His friend always refused. "No, Oliver," Dick said. "You have too little to spare." "But maybe you'll feel better with more food," Oliver replied. "A few tiny drops of gruel won't do much good," Dick said. "We all need more than that." The room where the boys were fed was a long stone hall. A copper pot stood at one end. The boys walked to the front in a single file line. They held their wooden bowls up, and Mr. Bumble dropped a ladleful of gruel in. The boys sat down at the long tables that filled the hall. They had to wait until everyone was seated. Anyone caught sneaking a bite was punished. The boys held their spoons while bowing their heads for grace. As soon as the signal was given, the boys dug into their meals. They were done in a matter of seconds. The boys' bowls never needed washing. They polished them with their spoons until they shone again. On the night that Oliver's life changed forever, a new boy was sitting at his table. His father was a butcher who could not pay his bills and lost his shop. The new boy was not used to the great hunger of the workhouse. He did not understand the council had no wish to change. This new boy had a plan. "One of us needs to talk to Mr. Bumble," he said. "We've got to ask for something more to eat." The other boys agreed that action was needed. The new boy held several pieces of straw in one hand. All the boys at the table, except Dick, took turns picking one. Oliver won the contest by drawing along the straw. All the boys slapped him on the back. Dick, however, looked worried. He thought this might be a bad idea. As soon as everyone was finished eating, for it did not take that long, Oliver rose from the table. He walked down the long row toward Mr. Bumble in the copper pot of gruel. Poor Oliver was shaking. Hey, here's a picture of Oliver. He's little. Poor Oliver was shaking with fear. He held his boat up toward Mr. Bumble and quietly said, "Please, sir, I want some more." The hall was silent. All the boys in the long hall watched Oliver in shock. Everyone waited for Mr. Bumble's response. At first he looked confused by the small boy. It seemed impossible that someone would ask for something else. The Bumbles in the workhouse board believed they were very generous people. They thought these boys and the other workhouse inmates should be grateful for the little they received. As he slowly realized that Oliver was holding up an empty bowl, Mr. Bumble became angry. "What?" Mr. Bumble screamed. "Please, sir." Oliver tried to speak more clearly. He tried to sound more forceful and brave. "I want some more." "More!" Mr. Bumble yelled. "More!" He was furious. How dare this ungrateful boy ask for more? It was almost to believe any child could have such nerve and greed. "Grab him!" Bumble shouted. Two members of the workhouse staff grabbed Oliver by his arms. They carried him from the long hall and locked him in a tiny room. Chapter 3. A New Home. Mr. Bumble went into a back room where the board was having its supper. There was, of course, no gruel in sight at this minute. The board members were dining on roast chicken and roast beef with potatoes, gravy, turnips, and peas. No less than 4 pies were waiting for them on the side table for dessert. Both the table and the men were filled with rich and delicious food. "Man, they give these poor kids gruel, and they over here dining like kings." "I'm sorry to deliver bad news, sir. I'm sorry to deliver bad news," Mr. Bumble said. He was out of breath from running. "But Oliver Twist, one of our young charges, he's gone mad," Mr. Bumble told the board members. The events that happened only minutes ago. They reacted as one might expect, with shock and horror. "Impossible," said a man in white vest. "Such an ungrateful child does not deserve the comforts of this establishment." The other board members agreed. They banged on the tables and said, "Hear, hear, and aye, aye." "I fear that he will only cause more trouble," Mr. Bumble said. "It would do us no good if he convinced the other boys to do the same." "Very well, then," said the man in the white vest. "Post a sign, Mr. Bumble. Offer this boy in a reward of £5 to anyone who would take him." The board members once again pounded on the table in agreement. Mr. Bumble went to do as he was told. The sign was up for several days before Mr. Strawberry, the local undertaker, came to the workhouse. He was down business when he noticed the sign. He was happy to take the £5, but he was not so sure about the boy. Mr. Bumble took him straight to the board to discuss Oliver's fate. "Who's to know if this boy will work hard?" Mr. Strawberry asked. "What good will it do me if I don't get enough work from him? What if it takes too much food and I get too little work in return?" "I've been careful to feed the boy very little," Bumble said, "so he doesn't demand much." Bumble was careful to avoid mentioning the incident in the long hall. "We'll allow a trial period," the man in the white vest said. "If Oliver is to your liking, you will train him as an undertaker's assistant. If he does not agree with you, you may bring him back. And I keep the £5, of course," said the undertaker. The man in the white vest cleared his throat. "Of course," he said slowly. "Whatever suits you best, Mr. Strawberry. We do ask, though, that you take the boy right away. We'll be happy to be rid of him. One less boy to feed and all that." So Oliver was given a small bundle of shirts and a wool blanket. They pushed him out the door with the undertaker. He did not even have time to say goodbye to Dick, and Mr. Strawberry led him away from the workhouse through gently falling snow. For the first time in his 10 years, Oliver was away from the Bumbles in the workhouse. It was all very frightening, but Oliver felt some excitement too. He hoped he was on an adventure. He felt certain, however, that no matter what happened, his new life had to be better than his old one. And that concludes the first 3 chapters. I hope you guys liked it. If you want me to read the next 3 chapters, comment below. Thank you for watching, and see you later, alligator.